You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Athan Hristodulu.
Welcome back again to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Athan Hristodulu. It is February 16th, 2022, and today we are coming back to you guys with another Power Rankings edition of the Greeks Gridiron, and today we are doing our AFC North Power Rankings, going through all four of the teams of the North and breaking them down one by one, going from 4 to 1 and picking out worst to first. We'll talk a little bit about the teams, kind of how they fare going to the offseason, how I feel they stand, kind of like a way too early power rankings, but rather than doing the entire league all at once, I'm breaking it down division by division. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into the discussion. So the AFC North, a hotly competitive division, a division that from first to fourth was separated by literally 2 games. So there's a lot going on in this division. I think there's a lot up in the air about this division, and there's definitely a possibility that we get a new division winner next season. You look at how injured some of these teams were, how competitive this entire division was this whole season, and imagine just where some of these teams would have ended up had they not been dealing with so many injuries. There's a lot of unknowns, and I think that this is probably going to be the hardest division to call come next season when everyone's healthy and we're getting set to actually start the regular season, and there's a lot of intrigue to go in it. But for my number 4 team, to start things off, we begin with the Cleveland Browns. Yes, the Cleveland Browns sitting at 8-9. They did finish last in the division this year. A really tough year. Baker Mayfield was injured all season. They also dealt with a few other injuries as well here and there. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were kind of out here and there going through the season. There was just never a moment in time where this team felt completely healthy, as honestly the majority of the teams in this division. But my biggest question really for this team is just how much was that shoulder injury hampering Baker Mayfield's playing ability? I'm somebody who was in the camp going into this season that believed that Baker Mayfield had kind of gotten over the hump last season, and he was either going to, stay around that same level or maybe even elevate himself a little bit further. There's a lot of talent on the team. Obviously, at the time, Odell Beckham was still there. This is prior to all of that going on. But come into the season, not the year that I think anyone in the Cleveland area really expected to happen. Myself, I didn't expect to have happen, of course. It was definitely a wild one, with the trading of Odell Beckham and all that stuff too. I think that this is a team that when healthy and when Baker Mayfield is healthy is probably going to end up being better than their 8-9 record, but it really boils down to how good the rest of the division is. I hate saying this, but it rings true to an extent. The Browns will be the Browns, man. And coming off such a successful year last season where they took the AFC Championship game to the absolute limit against the Chiefs, this was just a really disappointing year overall. I sincerely hope that Baker Mayfield's troubles boiled down more to his injury than anything else. So we'll have to see what happens there. As well as when it comes to things that they should be looking at through the offseason, there's not a ton on paper that this team really needs. They have some free agents coming up: Anthony Walker, David Njoku, Jadeveon Clowney, Malik Jackson, Takaris McKinley, MJ Stewart, Rashard Higgins, Malcolm Smith. So they have a few guys coming up, but realistically, they can bring back a lot of these guys. They're $25 million under the cap. There's really not a ton that the team needs. They have a great 1-2 punch at running back, probably the best in the league, arguably. They have a quarterback. The wide receiver corps is not the best, but definitely not the worst. Donovan Peoples-Jones really kind of came into his own last season. And then, of course, you have Jarvis Landry. David Njoku, if they opt to bring him back, he's an athlete, and for whatever reason, it just has not worked out in Cleveland for him. But I've always been fairly high on Njoku. I think there's a lot of talent here. Maybe they look to add another wide receiver to kind of fill out the receiving corps, because I really feel like it is. I've never really been too sold on Rashard Higgins, but it really feels like Donovan Peoples-Jones and Jarvis Landry are just the 2 guys that they have there, and then it's everybody else that's in that wide receiver room. So I think they look to add to the wide receiver corps this offseason, and we really just kind of have to see, what is the case with Baker Mayfield? Was it this injury that hampered him through this year, or is he as bad as some of the doubters think he actually is? I don't really know. This is a very odd situation for the Browns because I had very high hopes for them, and I think a lot of people did, but they ultimately flamed out, and they came into number 4, and at this point in time, I like them sitting ranked at number 4 in the AFC North. Next in, coming in at the number 3 spot, even though they made the playoffs, I have some concerns for them. The 9-7-1 Pittsburgh Steelers, they, in my opinion, are not better than the Ravens. The Ravens only missed the playoffs because one, they lost Lamar Jackson for like the last 4 weeks, which is such a weirdly not talked about thing, in my opinion. It was very odd because he was out, and it was kind of like week to week he was out, and then eventually he just kind of got shut down at the end of the season. But for that like month stretch that Jackson wasn't playing, it was never really talked about like he was missing that whole time. It felt really weird. Like the ball just kind of kept on rolling for the Baltimore. But for the Steelers, man, they lost their quarterback just last offseason. Their entire O-line kind of got like reset, and I think they're still reeling from that. Juju Smith-Schuster came back on a 1-year deal and ultimately missed the entirety of the season and came back just in time to be like a decoy in the playoffs. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with this team offensively. New quarterback, adding to the wide receiver corps potentially if Juju Smith-Schuster does not come back. Of course, that offensive line needs a lot of reworking as well. You do have a workhorse back in Najee Harris, so that is exciting for them. But ultimately, there is a lot of work to do on the offensive side of the football. The defense, however, while taking a step back from the year prior, it was not the number 3 defense that they were prior to this season. They ended up being, I think they logged in somewhere around the top 10 or right below the top 10. I can't remember the number exactly. They do have some pieces they need to look to add there as well, but mostly I think the focus this year, and there's just so many question marks on the offensive side of the ball, I have a hard time ranking them any higher than at the number 3 spot. The good news is, though, minimal free agents. Try Turner's a guy that's on there. Terrell Edmonds, Akello Witherspoon, like depth guys, things like that. Of course, Juju Smith-Schuster, Joe Hayden, Eric Ebron. So there are some guys that they're going to be potentially losing, but not necessarily like the number 1 guys at some of their best positions. So we'll have to see what they opt to do there. They have $31 million to kind of play around with. They are well under the cap space, which is great for them in this situation. Maybe they make a little wheel and deal for Aaron Rodgers if he's available. That's kind of something that has been alluded to here and there. People were talking about that wink to Mike Tomlin that Aaron Rodgers did a while back, which, in my opinion, Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh would be awesome. I'd be all for that. That's probably one of the... while he gets talked and linked to Denver about a lot, I would love to see him and Mike Tomlin stir things up over there in the AFC North. That would be an exciting pairing to me. But the Steelers, with so many questions on offense, I like them at number 3. Coming in at number 2, and I had a hard time going number 1 and number 2 on this one here. And you're thinking, oh, well, the Bengals were in the Super Bowl. Why did you have a hard time breaking this one down? Well, because it runs deeper than that. I kind of got into it a little bit when I started talking to the Steelers, and I wanted to throw that away for a second so I could talk about it when I get to the Ravens. But the Baltimore Ravens team was decimated by injuries this year, more than just about anybody else in the league. I would say that the Titans are the only other team that truly rivaled them in terms of injuries dealt with. Coming in at number 2, though, I'm going to go with the Baltimore Ravens. And I was very tempted to put them at number 1. And I understand that the Bengals were sitting in the Super Bowl this year. I get that. And they were literally 3 points away from potentially being Super Bowl winners themselves. But with the amount of injuries that they came into the season with and then just continued to endure throughout the entirety of the year, people look at the Titans and they think, oh, with the amount of people that they had to bring in through the whole season, the Ravens started out way behind the 8 ball out of the gate. And I'm so impressed with what John Harbaugh did this year, despite the fact that they only went 8-9, that they were literally in the playoff hunt up until that final week. And if they weren't missing Lamar Jackson for like the 4 or 5 games that he missed this year, maybe it was 6, I can't remember the exact number, this is a playoff team. They make a playoff push. I think they fare a lot better against the Chiefs, in my opinion, because they did beat the Chiefs week 2 of the season. So, I mean, there's a lot to look at with them. I expect them to continue to try to add to the wide receiver corps because, they brought in the Sammy Watkins thing, and that didn't really do much for them. So I expect them to continue to look for wide receivers, probably fill out the defensive backfield a little bit more. That was obviously a weakness for them with all the injuries. And while they do have stars when healthy, I think that they learned this year that they need to have more depth in that defensive backfield if they want to make sure that they can make a stretch run, especially now when we're looking at 17-game seasons. The year's even longer. You can never have too much depth, especially at one of the hardest positions in football, period. But when you look at the free agent list, Anthony Everett, Bradley Bozeman, Calais Campbell, who said he does not want to retire. You have Justin Houston as well, Deshaun Elliott, Jimmy Smith, Brandon Williams, Sammy Watkins. They are the team in this division that has the least amount of cap space. They're only sitting at $8.7 million under, so they are under, but there are guys that I do expect them to let go. I don't think Justin Houston's going to come back. I don't think Sammy Watkins is going to come back. Honestly, I don't think they're going to bring Jimmy Smith back either because he's not getting any younger at this point. Deshaun Elliott should be a guy that they look to bring back. Brandon Williams, of course, I like him there, but I expect them to move some money around. They got to hammer out a deal with Lamar Jackson sooner rather than later, but they could wait until next offseason if they wanted to, but that's cutting it real close. I think that overall, though, this Ravens team is always so well coached and a lot of their players are so well developed, and the next man up mentality really runs deep in Baltimore. I have a hard time putting them any lower than 2. And quite honestly, I almost talked myself into putting them at number 1. That's how much I like this Baltimore Ravens team going into next season, even before the draft and the free agency runs through, because they have just been so consistently good since they became a team in the NFL. The from ownership to the front office, from the GM to head coaching, they have just been such a good team for as long as I can remember, the almost 20 years or so that I've been watching professional football myself. The Baltimore Ravens have always been a team that's been in the thick of things, and I have a really hard time counting them out. And for them to have gone 8-9 this year and been so competitive with so many injuries, I have a hard time putting them any lower. Then coming in, of course, at number 1, we have the runner-up for the Super Bowl, the Bengals, 10-7. Their biggest issue is honestly the offensive line. And I don't think that's a secret. We all watched Joe Burrow get sacked 9 times against the Titans. We watched him get sacked 7 times against the Rams, almost 8 times if the referees didn't opt to call that last play an incompletion as opposed to a sack. They definitely need to work on the offensive line. That's a given, period. I think secondary help is something that they need to focus on as well. And I'm looking at you, Eli Apple. You got roasted plenty on the internet, so I don't need to add on to that. But I think secondary help is something that the Bengals definitely need to look at. They were an excellent second half team this year. They just need to be able to complete 4 quarters of a game. You can't just be the team that keeps coming back in the second half. That doesn't work out. That rarely ever works out. I feel like we see a team every now and again that comes up and they're, the second half team, the second half team. If you can't play a full 4 quarters, you're not going to win a football game. Zach Taylor has done an excellent job in the limited amount of time that he has been in the NFL. I think he's only going to get better. I think some of his game management is a little bit questionable at times, like the 4th and 1 really, really early. In my opinion, I liked the call, but at the same time, there was a piece of me too, because I'm somebody that's all for going for it and being aggressive. I like the analytics and I like looking at the numbers and being like, all right, well, it says, it's probably a better outcome for you to try to go for it, and you have a really good odd of making it. I'm all for that kind of stuff, but in the Super Bowl, take short points, because ultimately that 4th and 1, it hurt them. And there's a handful of things that hurt them, but that's like something that I keep just going back to. I'm like, damn, instead of just take the points. But I digress. I like the Bengals team overall. They have a lot of young talent, a very young, talented nucleus altogether, quarterback, wide receivers, running backs. If they can work out the offensive line, add some depth to the secondary, as they already started to work on just this past offseason, I think if they continue to mount on top of that, it'll only get better. And they already do have good talent back there. Mike Hilton, Jesse Bates, you can only add to it to make it a more effective group. They have so much money this offseason, $57.3 million. You could sign an entirely new offensive line. You could do what the Chiefs did last year. You could buy a whole new offensive line if you want to with $57 million. You do have some guys to bring back. Jesse Bates obviously needs to be re-signed. CJ Uzoma needs to be re-signed. Riley Reif was brought in, dealt with injuries, did not get to play as much as he wanted to this year. So, whether they opt to bring him back or not, I don't really know. Larry Ogunjobi's another guy as well. BJ Hill, which they definitely need to bring him back. Ogunjobi, though, almost feels kind of expendable. The D-line felt just as good, if not maybe a little bit better without him. I know he's a dude on that defense and he's kind of a leader there, but that's somebody I could see them expending for the sake of bringing in more offensive linemen and, finding that talent. If they're not going after Teron Armstead, I don't know what the hell the Bengals are doing. There's a potential for him to be moved from the Saints, whether he's a free agent or not. I think he's a free agent, or he's potentially going to be traded. I forget what it is exactly. I haven't looked at all the people yet for all these teams, but if they're not going after Teron Armstead, I don't know what the hell this Bengals team is doing. I like them at number 1. I think they're the leaders of this division. They blew out the Ravens twice, which is probably the biggest reason why I put them at number 1. But it's going to be a vastly different season next year. You're going to have full healthy teams. Steelers are going to be reworked. The Ravens are not going to have 20-some-odd people on IR going into the season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the AFC North. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. This has been my divisional power rankings for the AFC North. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.